few moments and reflect on the parallels between guilt and a rainbow. Now, why did I choose rainbow here to help understand guilt? It is basically to demonstrate the diverse natures of guilt and its multitude of stages, because that's what a rainbow is, diverse natures of colors, multitude of bands. So rainbows occur under certain conditions, as does guilt. Rainbows appear when there is sunlight and water, and the geometry of the earth helps shape the rainbow. So these are external factors that create the rainbow. Guilt is similar. It emerges from different conditions and expresses itself in varying intensities like the rainbow. So it's a good parallel. What is really important is rainbows are not permanent, and hence guilt too needs to be temporary if it is to serve a useful purpose. Rainbows appear huge compared to the size of our physical being. They are optical deceptions. You look at the size of your body and you look at the rainbow, it's massive, but that's an optical deception. But guilt too can take on dimensions far greater than our beings can fathom. So it's a good parallel. And from there, let us start to build further on our understanding of guilt. Now, what does the published literature say about guilt? We always look into what's the common message about, what does the public see? And first one which I came across is that in its true sense, guilt is a feeling of remorse or sadness over a past action experienced when we think we have caused them or breached our moral code. So it's a feeling of remorse or sadness over a past action. Remember, past. And it's experienced when we think we've caused harm or breached our moral code. So guilt can serve as our moral compass. Our values and how we process our emotions impact the way we react to our guilt. Now, there are three types of guilt. The first one is natural guilt, or remorse over something you did or failed to do. This is what we are going to focus on today, more so than the other two. The second is free-floating or toxic guilt, which comes from the underlying sense of not being a good person. People don't feel that they are good, that they are inherently good, and that brings guilt. And then there is existential guilt, which is the negative feeling that arises out of the injustice you perceive in the world. So many people starving, so many people hungry, and we feel guilty that look at us, we have all this and there's people dying out there. And also this existential guilt comes out of your own unpaid obligations to life itself. So this is the sort of broad nutshell. Now let's come back to, as usual, how I see guilt. And my definition would be a little more from a spiritual dimension, that guilt is a disruption of harmony within our beings and consciousness that serves to awaken us to our wrongdoings and take corrective actions. So my definition would be it's a disruption of harmony within our beings and consciousness that serves to awaken us to our wrongdoings and take corrective action. Now, as I've said before, each one of us is a being of harmony, embodying vast and complex orchestra within us. We are very refined beings, and each instrument of our orchestra represents a dimension of our being, such as, I'll go through a couple, our ethics. And there are so many subsets to ethics, such as fairness, care, kindness, honesty, mindfulness, generosity, and more. So each one of these subsets is an instrument in the orchestra. When we violate our ethics, we feel a sense of guilt. And depending on what we have done, we feel a different type of guilt, because one or more of our instruments is out of tune now. So that's how we should be viewing guilt. Next, there is the instrument of love, which also has many subsets of its own. Love for oneself, love for others, love for nature, love for experiences, love for the Creator and all creation, and more. Now, each of these subsets of love also has its own instrument in the orchestra. And when we do anything to cause damage to love, it invokes varying levels of guilt in us. So that's another dimension. Then the third dimension is faith, and it also has its own instruments. Now, faith has aspects such as beliefs, expression of our beliefs, religion and its teachings, and more. Now, once again, each of these elements has its own instrument in our orchestra. Now, here we can recognize the presence of free-floating or toxic guilt, for example. Why is this so? Most faiths prescribe severe punishment for sins, and we all know what sins are. The whole concept of committing sins makes us feel guilty on a constant basis to a lot of us. I remember when I was a kid, and every time I was naughty or I did something wrong, my grandmother would just intuitively say, "You're going to be thrown into the fire." And honestly, I thought I was like a hamburger. One day I'd end up in God's frying pan. And that's how I grew up. And, of course, as I grew older, I found it funny actually, because I said, okay, now I understand what she means, but hey, this is a bit extreme, Now, certain Christian beliefs say, for example, Christ died for our sins, even though we weren't around to have committed any sins. But there's a philosophy behind it. And those of us who don't fully understand that philosophy, we feel that it imposes a heavy burden of guilt on the followers. Of course, if you dig deeper, you will find another meaning to it too, which may not load you with guilt, but may place you in a more ethical position in life. But these sort of thoughts, when interpreted a certain way, create toxic guilt, constant guilt. You don't feel good about yourself, and that's something we want to avoid, all of us. Some beliefs result in people flagellating themselves and causing serious bodily harm to themselves as a form of repentance for things that occurred hundreds of years ago. Now, why do they do that? They may have a basis, but what is their interpretation of those events and how they express it today brings a whole load of guilt. So these are examples of free-floating or toxic guilt for those, and I must qualify, who interpret and internalize their beliefs accordingly. There are many who will intellectualize it, take the message, and not carry the guilt. So I'm not generalizing, but I'm just pinpointing for your understanding how guilt can manifest, even sometimes just based on what we keep hearing all the time. In my case, I thought I was a hamburger, but thank God I'm not. Then there is spirituality. And spirituality has its own elements that stem from a deeper connection with our life force, our soul, our super consciousness, and our search for a deeper meaning in everything. Interestingly, spirituality actually can be a healer of guilt. It's not a creator of guilt, it's a healer of guilt. Now, you ask me, why is that so? It is so because guilt is born in the past, always, and carried by us into the present and the future, instilling remorse and fear. So guilt is of the past, and then we carry it, and it puts remorse and fear in us, and some of us carry it into the future too. Spirituality only lives in the present, and it fosters an understanding of karma being a loving teacher, and that the errors that we make are in fact learning opportunities that help us gain knowledge and light. So spirituality is all about light, whereas guilt can bear a burden of darkness. So that's the distinction. Now, you and I, and we can all keep adding lots of dimensions of our being that make up our orchestra, but that's not the goal of today's discussion. I think we've sort of touched on that important point is disruption of harmony, and now you can get a slight insight into how. But what is important here is to recognize that we are all beings of harmony, and when our orchestra plays its tune with all instruments working together in harmony, we find ourselves in a state of what we call harmonious peace or happiness. When our instruments are in conflict, the music we create is one of instability, unhappiness, frustration, and turmoil. So the nature of music that we create depends entirely on the harmony of our orchestra. We call this our inner harmony. And guilt is the disruptor of inner harmony. That's the main point. Now, remember that nothing is ever created in this world without a purpose. Hence, guilt too has an important purpose in our lives. It plays a specific role in our lives. What is this role? So here, our dear friendly angels Cyrus and Luminous have joined us today, and they're going to help us understand guilt a little better and show us how we can manage guilt in our lives. So Cyrus says, let us start by recognizing some of the stages of guilt. He says the first one is realization of the wrong that one has done. So the first one is realization. Next, it's recognition of the scope of harm done. Sometimes people either underestimate or overestimate this scope, but that's the next step. Next is acceptance of responsibility, leading to a call for action. Next is taking action towards resolution, which includes seeking forgiveness or taking corrective measures, etc. Or there can be inaction and carrying guilt for an indefinite period, which can be very unhealthy. So let us join Eliza today, because she is very sad, struggling with a deep sense of guilt. And so Cyrus and Luminous are with her, and through her life we're going to try and understand guilt at a deeper level. So they ask her, why are you so sad? Cyrus asks Eliza, and Eliza replies, I've done so much wrong and hurt the people I love, and I hate myself for it. I cannot forgive myself, and I feel this world will be a better place without me. So Cyrus places his hand on Eliza's shoulder as she weeps, and this helps calm her down. He says, tell us your story and explain to us why you feel this way, and let's try and understand. And so Eliza says, I lived with my parents, Sarah and Alex, in Syracuse, in the countryside, and went to school and college there in Syracuse. And we had a simple home, a bungalow with a large, beautiful garden, which was my mom's pride and joy. She loved caring for all her plants and flowers, and we called this garden Sarah's Paradise. My father worked in a local steel fabrication shop, and he went to work clean each morning and returned in the evening with his face covered in black soot. But he worked very hard and was always happy about the fact that he could provide for my mom, my sister Anna, and myself. My mom and dad had great dreams for me, and they did everything they could to help pay for my education, and I was a good student and tried never to disappoint them. Then, in my third year at college, I met Isaac and fell in love with him. He was a fine young man who treated me very well, and mom and dad both liked him too. But Isaac had friends who were a bad influence on him. They pushed him to his limits, they encouraged him to go out drinking with them, and before long they had Isaac sniffing cocaine with them. His best friend Noam became the local drug dealer in our college and had lots of money to splash around on all of us. She said, I loved Isaac and joined him when he went out with his friends and their girlfriends. And initially, I tried to keep away from the drugs, but over time, I got into cocaine and I became addicted too. My education suffered, and everything in my life began to go wrong. My parents did not know about my drug addiction for quite a while. Now, I needed more money to buy drugs each day. I was a slave to it. And I had to find money to buy drugs for Isaac and myself in any way that I could. Imagine I even stole money from my dad's wallet a few times, and there wasn't much money in it to steal. Then Noam's girlfriend Tricia said she could show me a way to make a lot of money. And the next thing I knew, I was stripping in nightclubs and prostituting myself. And I sank lower and lower each day, but could not do anything to help myself. My sister Anna, who was much younger than me, knew I was out with Isaac and having fun, but she had no clue as to how low I had sunk. Then one day my father saw me getting into a car with one of my regular clients who was as old as my father, and he followed us. And he was devastated when he found that his princess had become a junkie, stripper, and prostitute. This was something he could not fathom. Both my parents were deeply hurt because they were religious people, but even their faith could not help them through this. The shame was too much for them, and I could not do anything to help them or myself. So I left home and went to Rochester and moved in with Isaac, where we both got by on my income and his revenues from dealing drugs. Isaac got arrested by the police and he is serving a 20-year prison term. I was sent to rehab, where I spent several years trying to recover from my addiction. I got a job in a restaurant. I stopped stripping and sleeping with clients. I cleaned up my act. And finally I went back home to see my parents a few weeks ago, only to find that they no longer lived in the bungalow. Sarah's paradise was overgrown with weeds. I learned that my dad had died in an accident at work, and I had no clue. All I could remember was his dejected face before I left home. I was devastated by the fact that I would never have an opportunity to apologize to him. And Mom and Anna had moved and left no forwarding address. But I learned from her friend that Mom had sunk into a deep depression and that she was no longer the Sarah they knew. Anna became her carer and gave up school. I feel like I've caused all this destruction to my family, and I hate myself, and I cannot find a single moment without remorse and guilt gripping my heart and soul. So Cyrus and Luminous were very sad. They listened quietly, they heard her story, and they tried their best to comfort her. This poor young girl was dealing with guilt of the harshest kind. She had assumed responsibility for everything that had gone wrong in the life of her family, everything. So Cyrus said to her, "My dear Eliza, all that has happened has happened. All we can do now is look at where we are in the present and what we are going to do going forward. So let us try to understand a few things that can help us look ahead with hope." Firstly, he said, "Tell us about your happy moments with your family." And Eliza had a weak smile and she spoke about the times when she was happy and everything about her life was in harmony. Everything seemed to work, and her best times of the day were supper time with her family. She also loved the moments with her mom, helping her with the garden, Sarah's paradise, and her after dinner walks with her dad. She enjoyed caring for her little sister, to give her mom a break wherever it was possible. She said all these little things made me happy. So Luminous asked about Isaac, and she said that when they first fell in love with each other, they were very happy. These were some of the best moments of her life. Cyrus said, "So you've been blessed with the experience of love, happiness, and harmony, my dear. And seeing the smile on your face as you tell me about it, we know that you would love to have it all again." And Eliza replied, "Yes, I so yearn for things to be okay again, but I know it's not possible because I ruined it all." Cyrus said, "Well, let's not jump to conclusions yet. Let's take a step back. Tell me about when you started indulging in drugs with Isaac and his friends. Give us an insight into that." And Eliza said, "Everything in my being at the time was unhappy about what I was doing. My conscience kept biting at me every time I was sober, but I could not find the strength to do anything about it." So they said, "Explain to us what you mean by conscience kept biting at you." And Cyrus asked, and Eliza replied, "Something in my heart just hurt. It made me feel dark and heavy. It told me that what I was doing was very wrong, and that's what I mean. Okay, so something within you was urging you to stop, Cyrus asked. Yes, Eliza replied. And what was that something that was urging you to stop? Cyrus asked. I don't know, Eliza replied. Luminous said all the things that you were doing were disrupting something within your being that invoked your sense of right and wrong. That's why you felt pain in your heart. That's why you felt that heaviness, that depressing feeling. Your inner harmony was disrupted by the realization of what was happening and that what was going on was wrong. Betraying the love and trust of your parents was at the root of it. But you didn't know it because all you felt was pain. And you killed the pain with more drugs. So Cyrus said that feeling you describe was guilt in many different forms that came together to awaken you to the fact that you had transgressed into the wrong. That pain and heaviness was not a punishment. It was your inner being waking you up to the wrong that was happening in your life, calling you to act, to correct things. So your guilt started off as a guiding hand, but you shut it down. Then more went wrong as you followed Trisha's path of stripping and prostitution, which enabled you to buy more drugs so you could shut down your guilt even quicker. Now you've cleaned up your life, and he said, we are so proud of you. Such a great accomplishment, Luminous said. From where you were, you've cleaned up your life, you've put things back together. This is very, very difficult. But Eliza said, yes, but now the guilt engulfs me every moment. I can't shut it down anymore. I don't have the power of drugs to rely on. So Cyrus said, you can try to deal with your guilt in a different way. And Eliza said, tell me, I'm all ears. He said, first, recognize that guilt is actually the good part of your being that is showing you where you have erred. It is like your teacher, and it speaks to you through feelings of disruption and pain. Even when an organ in your body is unwell, you feel pain. But this pain is not a punishment. It is a call to action to make you go and see the doctor to get some help, right? Yes, Eliza replied. So the pain of guilt is a call to action. And that raises the question, what action is it asking you to take today? Eliza replied, I don't know. Well, Lumina said there are many actions you can take, some of which you've already taken, like getting rid of the drugs and alcohol. You did work very hard on that, didn't you? Eliza said, yes. Lumina said, it was that powerful call to action that helped you fight through the very challenging moments without succumbing to addiction. So your guilt has helped you there more than you realize. Then she said, but then why am I in so much pain right now? It's worse than it was before. Cyrus said, let's take this step by step. Let's try and understand that question too. The best way, he said, to work with messages of our guilt are, number one, step one was cleaning up your act, which you did phenomenally well. Once you were better, were you in pain? Eliza said, yes, but it was not as bad as I feel right now. So he said, at the time, Eliza said, I did actually even have some happy moments. And I found that I was getting better. Right, Cyrus said. So once you were clean and sober, you went home. There you were faced with new information, very difficult information. So that's a separate step. Don't mix them up. You went home and now you were faced with new information. Your father had died in an industrial accident, and you immediately felt responsible for his death. Hence your guilt kicked in and your harmony was disrupted. This, Eliza, is a new situation, a new step. You always have to break your guilt into steps. Your guilt is now calling on you to act on your thoughts and bring clarity. It's asking you to bring clarity to your thoughts by exploring the truth behind this new event. The truth is you did not kill your father. The accident did. So the first point of action is to clarify your thoughts. You did not kill your father. The accident did, so accept that fact. And don't assume responsibility for something you did not do. Alisa paused and said, "That is true. I did not kill him." So he said, "Does that make you feel better when you accept that fact?" "Yes, it does," Alisa said. "Now let us look at what you really did do. You disappointed your father and hurt his feelings. You made him unhappy, and so there you did contribute to the wrongdoing, and there you can take responsibility. So now the level of guilt that you have has come down many notches to the actual situation, which is you caused disappointment and hurt. You did not kill anyone you loved. You caused disappointment and hurt. And that is where you went wrong, and that is what you have to resolve. So now you have to accept that you cannot reverse time and go back to those moments and undo what you did, right? So going back into the past is not an option. So what options do you have now? She said, "You know the dreams your father had for you, right? It is in your power to fulfill them all now, going forward, isn't it?" "Yes," Alisa replied. She said, "After overcoming addiction, I can do anything I set my mind to." So Luminous added, "So the way we see it, your call to action is as follows. 1. Seek forgiveness from your father." Your call to action says, seek forgiveness from your father and know that where he is now, he knows everything you went through. So there is no mystery there for him. He's moved on. He has left this plane of ours, moved on. So in his journey, this is actually a closed chapter. He did his best for you when he was alive, but it did not work out so well for him. That's where it stops. But now he knows the real truth and he has moved on. So the best way for you to gain his forgiveness is to forgive yourself. That is what your father would have wanted you to do if he were alive. He would have forgiven you, but for the pain to really leave you, he would have wanted you to forgive yourself. So that's your next call to action. Seek his forgiveness and forgive yourself too. Forgiving yourself is extremely important here to deal with the guilt. Then the next call to action, Lumina says, is go ahead and become the person he dreamed you would become. I would say your father would be extremely proud of how you overcame addiction. His dream for you was not really about any profession. It was about you realizing your true potential. So go out and do just that. So Elisa was feeling a bit better now. She had some direction. And the pain in her was coming down slowly because these two angels taught her how to break down her guilt into steps and extract the reality. What should she take responsibility for? What should she not? And how should she go ahead? And now they've given her a plan. So Cyrus said, tell us what you've just realized, Elisa, so that we are all clear. We want to make sure you're really clear on what you're going to do next. So Elisa said, what I've learned from you is that my guilt disrupted my harmony from within, telling or warning me that what I was doing was wrong. So my guilt was a friend and teacher. She said, my guilt calls me to action. My first action was to bring clarity to my thoughts. And this is what I should always do, bring clarity to my thoughts before I assume responsibility. And she said, then it taught me that I did not kill my father. So I should not assume such a huge burden on myself. It tells me that I did disappoint and hurt my father, but now I cannot reverse the clock and undo what has been done. It tells me I should act in the present and seek my father's forgiveness. And even though he's moved on now and is no longer in our plane of existence, and it tells me that he does know the real truth about what happened in my life, and that he would want me to forgive myself, and so I should. It tells me his dream for me was to realize my full potential, and so I will. That's excellent, Cyrus and Luminous said. You've learned. Do you feel a bit better where your dad is concerned? Yes, Eliza said, I can work on myself and find peace with Dad along these lines. Great. But then Eliza said, now what about Mom? Cyrus said, you need to realize that Mom's depression was not created by you. She was doing okay as long as your dad was alive. He was her pillar, and losing him so suddenly under those circumstances pushed her into depression. Even if you had done none of the things you did, like drugs, prostitution, all that, and you had been the loving daughter you always were, the reality is Dad was going to die, for sure, at that precise moment, in that precise way. Mom was going to slip into depression, and you and Anna would have to be her carers. You were not there for her, so Anna assumed that responsibility, costing her her education. So what your guilt is asking you to do, where Mom and Anna are concerned, is to be clear that you did not cause your mother's depression to this devastating level. You may have contributed to it in part, but it was your dad's death that caused it mainly. So be clear. Be clear. Your guilt is urging you to seek clarity and don't assume responsibility for everything and assume responsibility that you drove your mom to depression. No, the passing of your dad did. Next, they said your guilt is calling you to act on finding Mom and Anna and doing right by them. She said, but they've left no forwarding address, Eliza said. Sure, Luminous replied, but in this day and age you can find anyone if you try hard enough. So get on with rebuilding your life. Start looking for them and you will find them. So Eliza is feeling a lot better after gaining this understanding. Cyrus and Luminous help her find her mom and Anna, and they are delighted to be reunited again. She assumes responsibility for both of them and works hard to get Anna back to school. She builds Sarah's paradise with her mom in her new home and helps her heal. So Eliza, with the help of Cyrus and Luminous, overcomes her guilt by restoring all the instruments in her being back to harmony. She is now very self-aware, and each time she feels the pain of guilt, she asks herself, what is my call to action here? And then she acts on it. Remember, the word self-aware is a key to processing and reacting to guilt. So my dear friends, Cyrus and Luminous have taught us some fundamentally important lessons about guilt today. And you can apply these lessons to deal with your guilt. So through Eliza's example, you could see that something that was so dreadful, if you break it up into steps, assume responsibility for what you really did do and not take the burden of the whole world on you, you can process and manage your guilt and use it for the purpose it came to you, which was a gentle, loving teacher to help guide you and learn from the experience and better yourself. So this was, in a nutshell, through her life, we've got a better insight on how we can deal with the guilt. So guilt is not something to be carried. It is something to be acted upon. So let's wrap up by summarizing the core lessons they've shared with us in a couple of minutes. 1, guilt is a friend and teacher, and it communicates to you through disruption of your inner harmony. 2, guilt is a call to action. 3, the first action is to gain clarity about the situation itself and not to assume an unfair burden upon yourself about everything that has happened. Next, there is forgiveness, and we can either seek forgiveness from the living directly or seek forgiveness from the deceased with love and understanding and prayer. Next, we must accept that our guilt is born by past events of the past, and we cannot undo the past. We have to accept that. Guilt comes to us in the present as a friend, pushing us to take corrective action. And guilt is not something to be carried. It is something to be acted upon and then let go, so that you can return to the happiness that comes from restoring your inner harmony. So my dear friends, these are some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you today. The whole concept of guilt is vast and can take many webinars to cover. But today we have touched on some of the key principles and stages of guilt, which share a close resemblance to a rainbow. So the next time you see a rainbow, remember our conversation today on guilt. So this was the insight I wanted to share with you, and I hope that you'll go in and explore it further and intellectualize some of the learnings that Cyrus and Luminous have thrown our way. And hopefully I will get the recording out to you as soon as possible.